Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney, and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 2 years, I've interviewed over 150 people around this question, not with the objective of finding a universal answer, but creating content that prompts your own inquiry into finding and defining your own answer. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience. On the 12th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, I'm joined by Alison Taylor, who is a clinical professor at NYU Stern School of Business, executive director at Ethical Systems, and is writing a book for the Harvard Business Review Press. In this episode, Alison describes how curiosity has been her main driving force in life, taking her on a journey from investigating corporate corruption on several continents to teaching at NYU. She talks about embracing adventure, playing to your strengths, loving your work, and the importance of contributing to what you care about to remain optimistic in the face of a turbulent world. Given both our proclivities for jumping continents and careers at various points in life, I took a lot of inspiration from her story of trusting herself and going her own way. And if you enjoy this conversation, please like, share, and subscribe, as I'd greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. So without further ado, the 12th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Alison, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. As I mentioned to you on our preamble before, I'm a huge fan of the content you're putting out on LinkedIn. I very much like the tone and the substance of what you're putting out, so I was very excited to speak to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So the first question, Alison, as I tend to have is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Gosh, it's such a good and big question. I suppose I'm always trying to find out what motivates other people, what it's like to be other people. I feel that I move through life to a great extent as an observer. I was an investigator for 12 years. I like to understand secrets. I like to understand complexity. I like to understand the things that people are feeling but not saying. And so my career has taken me in a lot of very different directions. So is my personal life. But if there is a red thread flowing through everything rather, I would say it is a deep curiosity about what motivates other people.
There's so much in that which I absolutely loved. The sense of understanding what people are feeling but not saying. Can you give me a sense of how you navigate that?
Sure. So, the first thing I would say is my childhood was rather odd. There were a lot of family secrets. There were a lot of things that were felt and not said in my family, and so I think that's a real kind of animating force for me. I mentioned already I spent 12 years investigating fraud and corruption and bribery and money laundering, first of all in the Middle East and Africa, and then in the Americas. And I became deeply curious, one, about how businesses behave in these countries. So what business ethics looks like. But I suppose the more kind of interesting conclusion I came to after spending 12 years gathering evidence and documenting the facts and trying to help my clients is that the facts don't matter as much as the stories people are telling themselves. So I would have this experience over and over again of presenting the facts and being quizzed very aggressively by someone very powerful, or I would watch someone very powerful override somebody less powerful, or I would perhaps watch a senior leadership team find a convenient scapegoat to blame for something that they clearly all knew about. And so as I moved through my career, I moved from this very kind of analytical frame. I have an academic background. I was an academic person. I thought that analysis would kind of uncover the answers to a lot of the questions I had. And it gradually became clear to me that facts don't necessarily convince people. We all approach the world with a certain frame. We all tell the stories that we want to tell about ourselves, our motivation, our character. And so I went back to college around 10 years ago to study organizational psychology. And that has given me the tools and the concepts to kind of observe and diagnose and understand what I'm seeing. And so I tend to ask a lot of questions about what is really going on beneath the surface. I tend to not take what people are telling me directly as being the really interesting thing to explore. And so I've been lucky later in my career to have learned about some of the kind of concepts and frameworks that we might use to inform this understanding of how human beings behave. And I think clearly, no matter how you see the world in the last decade or so, it has become incredibly clear that people believe what they want to believe. If you can think about the pandemic, you can think about politics. So I think the questions that I've been asking, if anything, have become more and more relevant over time.
Yeah, it's fascinating, this sense of we think we're kind of rational beings, and we love to dress ourselves up like that. But even if you look at, I think, Zaltzman's work at Harvard, where he says that 95% of our consumer decisions are made subconsciously. You think of the idea of people arguing. If someone's coming from an emotional place and someone's coming from a logical place, they're almost like they're passing ships in the night. And we can both be on either side of those discussions. I'm not saying we're usually the logical one or anything like that, but it's our ability to deceive ourselves, or to not see the writing on the wall sometimes is really fascinating to me.
It is fascinating. And then by extension, what does it take to change society? What does it take for norms and ideas and values to shift? They're clearly shifting. They're shifting in real time.
Yeah.
And that seems to me a more kind of interesting collective phenomenon than thinking about the arguments we might need to make to convince people that climate change is real, or some of the other
Yeah.
questions that I spend my day job thinking about. So there's a wonderful book called The Honor Code by a professor at NYU Law that talks about how norms shift. And one of the arguments he makes is that people, in many cases, are making rational arguments about the need to end something. He talks, for example, about foot binding in China, where people were arguing that this was barbaric for 6 centuries. And when it ended in a period of 6 years. So very, very often, I think there's this sort of mounting pressure. Something will seem impossible, and if it's never going to change, and then suddenly it changes all at once. We can think more recently maybe about gay marriage. That is an issue where societal attitudes shifted very, very dramatically after this seeming like something that would never change in my lifetime. So I find these questions super interesting, partly because I spend so much time in the classroom, and I'm so interested to see what particularly the undergrads think about, what they're motivated by, how they think about their careers and that kind of thing.
What attracted you to shift to the classroom?
Well, I come from a family of teachers, so teachers and
Same here.
academics. So when I was young, I was like, "Oh, that looks awful." Obviously, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go and work in business. I'm going to go and work in the real world. And then by the time I got to middle age, I was like, "Oh, I really want to teach. That seems like real fun." And then I got into the classroom, and it is in fact the most fun and energizing thing I've ever done. I would not say I'm great at it. I've still got a lot to learn, but I think I have the most natural ability in this area of anything I've ever done, and I find it compelling beyond belief. I mean, it is certainly something I will never get bored with. Every single class is different. You can teach the same material. You are going to have a completely different discussion. The group dynamics in the classroom, the ideas I come across, the kind of ability to have my ideas challenged, the ability to debate things with a bunch of really, really smart, dynamic people. What could be better? I don't think anything could be better.
It does sound like immense fun, all right. The idea, though, just before you'd mentioned there, the sense of, I don't. It seems to give long term. I'm quite optimistic about humans. Like, I'm not ignorant to the challenges that we face, right? And I'm not saying that cataclysmic events may not be coming our way. Um, but there's something you just said there. Just the almost like the groundswell that occurs when you think change will never ever happen. And yet, like, we seem to be so stuck in our ways, and people will see what we want to see. But it seems like such a beautiful paradox you were describing there. Yet, kind of considerable change happens, and when it happens, it seems inconceivable. How
Yeah,
do you like? Do you like, even with the, you talked about the corruption that you uncover, and then I see a lot of the things you're putting out at times is just kind of like pointing out, and I love it, like the dislocation almost between companies' words or their values and their actions,
sure.
which is something that interests me a lot as well. But does this keep you optimistic through uncovering so much like bullshit, shall we say, or what's your kind of observation of that?
Yeah, I talk a lot about corporate hypocrisy, corporate messaging. I have a certain view of how this all works and why it's not working anymore, and why it needs to change. I've just written a book about this, so I will be discussing this a lot more in the coming months. I mean, I think I've got a fairly dark view of the world, is the truth. I have spent
Right.
a lot of time at the ethical boundary of organizations, at the ethical boundary of how human beings behave. I see a lot of reasons to be pessimistic. But at the end of the day, I still feel a lot of cause for optimism. I do see things changing in real time. There's a wonderful Ursula Le Guin quote that said capitalism seems inevitable, so did the divine right of kings. And I love that
Right.
that quote as well. It expresses the same thing, right?
Yeah.
There's always a lot of people supporting the status quo. There's always a lot of people saying, "Oh, this is impossible. This is just the way it is." Shareholder value is just like gravity. There's nothing we can do about it. And then you can see during your lifetime that in fact things do dramatically change. And so I'm with you. I think we are an adaptable and interesting species. I think I see enormous cause for optimism in how young people are reframing the world, young people are reframing their careers, young people are thinking about these topics. And so, I think part of being optimistic is about having humility, and knowing that you don't know everything, and trying to kind of observe what's going on around out there, and impact it positively how you can. And I don't know how else you can move through life without feeling despair. You have to have some sense of agency and impact. So maybe it's me telling myself this story because I want to believe it, but I think I think at the end of the day, despite everything I've seen and everything I've experienced and all the very intractable problems I think about every day, I'm still animated by optimism.
Isn't that kind of incredible though? Like, I remember maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I first read a book by Noam Chomsky. I think it was called How the World Works or something like this. And he because I think my head was so kind of in a very kind of not mainstream place, but whatever was in the news, I kind of took it on its face value, I'd say. And I know trust in media and the whole landscape has changed dramatically, and even in that period of 8 years or so. But I remember being so kind of taken aback by some of the things that he was commenting on that I sent him an email saying, how do you like how do you kind of still maintain like peace or calm or in the face
Yeah.
of knowing all this stuff when the mainstream or the majority of people are just viewing the world completely different? I almost think like the dissonance would almost be too much for me to bear. But I think there's something really beautiful about the fact that you've spent all this time investigating corruption, and even pointing out hypocrisy and these kind of things, and yet I don't know, maybe even the idea of working with these students in the classroom and seeing the shift in them. But there's still something, and even in your energy levels, there's still you don't strike me as someone who this is all getting too much to bear, even in the face of what you're looking at.
I guess it's some life force we all have, or some of us have. There's some energy, there's some persistence, there's some, I don't feel that I need a reason to get up and keep going. I seem to have a lot of energy to go and kind of talk and solve these problems. Perhaps that is because I'm very fortunate to have now found a role where I think it does play to my strengths, where I think I can have a contribution. I spent a long time working for organizations where what I could say publicly was very curated and very controlled. So I've also had a lot of freedom in the past few years from being able to say exactly what I think. People in general have been quite receptive to that. So that's been very, very interesting as well. I mean, you mentioned LinkedIn. I mean, every time I post, I get a lot of private messages. I get a lot of insight. I get a lot of sense of how the world is changing. And maybe, back to this sense of kind of curiosity. I'm an investigator. I like information. I like to uncover what is really going on. So if I'm getting insight, if I feel I'm answering some question I had about the past or about the future or about what I'm seeing out there, then I feel like I'm moving forward and learning something and maybe able to share that with the world. So, yeah.
And this sense of curiosity, I know you're saying even growing up that there's a deep curiosity between what was being said and what your experience of childhood was or family dynamics. This curiosity, has this just been a key driver for you for as long as you can remember, or
Yeah.
has it waned?
No, it's possibly my animating force. I mean, another thing, we never really got to travel when I was a kid. We'd go to Wales every summer to stay at my grandmother's cottage. So I was also desperate to get on a plane. I as soon as I finished college, I went around India for a year, and then I spent really 2.5, almost 3 decades really running around the world, going to all sorts of crazy places, having adventures, seeing things that I'd never dreamed of. I mean, I suppose that's another thing. If you grow up in the UK, you grow up in London, and then you go to India. I think one of the things that was really revelatory for me then was that a lot of the things I'd assumed were common to all human societies, it then became very, very clear that the range of human behavior, the spectrum of human behavior and values and beliefs and lifestyles was so much broader than I'd ever imagined. And so I just wanted to go and find and see and learn more. And I've been able to do that. More recently, I got a little more sick of traveling. And now I find I can contribute best in the classroom and spend a little bit less time on planes. But that curiosity to see the world, to meet people, to understand what motivates other people has driven so many of my decisions. It's incredible.
It is amazing, and like I went to India more recent. Like I didn't go to India until my early 30s, but there's you mentioned something earlier, even just like in terms of humility of you don't know it all. I
Right.
think there's something about seeing other cultures or other ways of life that just that do make us a lot more humble in our curiosity, almost like as in, oh, I thought I had a very clear
Right.
like lens through which I view the world, and now it's completely knocked me on my ass again in terms of having to
100%.
rebuild up what it's all about. Like,
Absolutely. And I think I've had that experience not just at the macro level, at the micro level. You can know somebody for decades. How well do you really know them? We're all dynamic. We're all different in different contexts. We're all changing all the time. So, in that context, how do you have a good relationship? How do you have a good dynamic? How do you have good communication? Should you ever think that you know what someone's thinking, you know what someone's going to do? I would say no. So I think this sort of level of humility about not understanding the world, that kind of urge to ask questions as if you just woke up and are looking at things for the first time. I try to bring that across every aspect of my life, not just my career, but also my personal life, my friendships. I try. I'm not saying I'm doing a great job here, but that's what I'm trying to do.
but I think that's wonderful. Like, because I think the assumption that, as you say, like we're so bloody complex, and even all the paradoxes that we're holding at times, like, simultaneously I want security, I also want adventure. Like it's not even to say that it's not to say that I'm hypocritical in my actions. I just have a number of elements of myself that are seeking expression. And so
Exactly.
as you're saying, that's a constantly shifting thing. So for me that's even a hard one for me to always like, know the temperature of the water in terms of what that is for me, let alone another human being.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So I think, having some humility about yourself, your own blind spots. I don't even know what my own blind spots are. I just know that I have them
Yeah.
it is one kind of question here. And then, I mean, I think it's just important to keep asking questions, and the older I get, quite honestly, the less I think I know about anything. So that's how I find myself. Perhaps I will keep going here, and assuming I live to be as old as I would like to, I'll really conclude I knew nothing in the first place.
In terms of, I know I asked you, I know I asked you at the very start, like, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life? In terms of what you're like seeking as you move through life, and even different things that you're understanding about yourself, like, oh wow, I almost looked at teaching at one point as if, nah, not for me, and now I realize, oh wow, I've actually got a almost like a natural feeling or a calling or like a high level of natural skill towards it. Like, is there has this kind of question of what you wanted from life kind of shifted as you've moved through these different careers, different countries?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been someone that has been a big planner. I don't think I've ever had a long term vision or kind of concept or script for my life. It has felt as if I take direction, I react to events, I react to forces. I'm very, very conscious of paths not taken. I think a lot about parallel lives. I like all those books, thinking about what if you had taken a different decision at this point? What if you played that differently? I had a decision in 2011 about whether I should move to New York for a job that I thought about, for a month. Very, very deeply. I wasn't sure what to do. And I still spend a lot of time thinking, what if I'd stayed in London at that time? What would my life have been like? Who would I have met? What would my career have looked like? And so I like to think about the paths not taken, the paths not traveled. I think it's very difficult for us maybe to fully appreciate how much of a role chance and fate and luck plays in our life. So I try to think about that, but not be crushed by it.
And so in terms then, even that decision to go to New York and thinking about it for a month, but then also not simultaneously not really approaching life with a fixed plan. And I think out of like, I must have interviewed over 150 people now at this stage in around this question. And even for so many people that have, objective levels of success, I'm always so surprised that there still seems to be a consistency in how frequently people claim not to have it all planned out. Like, is it to walk even on an arbitrary sense of a scale of 1 to 10? Where would you kind of place yourself in that sense of just like responding to life and moving through life in reacting to what it offers you?
Oh, I'm a 10, I think. I mean, this is again, it's a theme I see again in the classroom with the undergrads. I teach at Stern Business School at NYU. Very expensive degree, very academic
Yeah.
degree, really a path to Wall Street. You can go from Stern to Goldman Sachs to a private equity firm to a big house in Connecticut. And there are students that are doing that. They will say, I'm going to work my 100 hours a week. I'm going to get my fat job. I'm going to be a success. Here's what I'm going to do for my children. I find those people a little scary. I like the people that are asking questions. What do I enjoy? What animates me? What motivates me? So I certainly see out there are people with a lot of direction. There are people with clear goals. There are people with a life plan. I see them. I just find them a little alien. That is not how I experience the world, for better and worse. And then I also get a lot of people that seem to see some logic behind my career. And when I'm asked about my career, I can certainly make it sound like a very coherent narrative story. That is not what happened. I was flailing around at many points in time. You and I discussed in the prep call for this, we're both rather good at taking pay cuts and doing things that other people would not consider sensible. I've done a lot of that. It has in general played out for me. I don't care that much about money, but it has not been detrimental over the long term. But very often I've done stuff just to shake things up. I love running away. I love getting on a plane and landing somewhere new. So I think I wanted to have adventures is how I felt, and I've succeeded in doing that, and long may it continue.
That's the idea of running away, jumping on a plane and running off.
Right.
That resonates very strongly
Yeah.
with me. But in terms of what do you think has given you, like, have you developed a level of trust in yourself to do this? Like this kind of embracing of uncertainty? Like, has this been something that you feel is innate in you? Because and it's so bloody reassuring for me to see this working out so well for you. Hopefully my own decisions of taking pay cuts will have a similar arc to it. But in terms of just What do you think? Like, because so few people do kind of give themselves that permission to truly embrace this life in the kind of the way that you're describing there. Is do you ever look back on that with any kind of rhyme or reason around it, or how do you interpret that?
I think when I was young, actually, I had a very, very weak sense of self. I didn't know who I was. Maybe a lot of sensitivity to what other people are doing, seeing what motivates them. Very, very easy to impact me if you have a strong personality. Maybe less of a sense of self, less of an anchor, less of a direction, less of a robust ego. I think as I've got older, it's maybe one of the great joys of getting older. I have developed more of a sense of self. I've developed more of a sense of logic and right and wrong. I'm less easy to channel and kind of drive in a certain way. And I think, now I'm getting really old. I'm just getting going. I'm much more argumentative. I'm much more clear on what I know, what I have expertise in. It's much less easy to patronize me than it used to be. So perhaps this has been something I discovered as I went along. I don't think I had a sense of direction. I think that is partly why I've been able to have so much variety in my career, and for better and worse. But now I hit middle age. I think yeah, I do know who I am. I do know what I want, and I look forward to doubling down on that as I move forward.
The idea of just being able to at any point in time say, I do know who I am and I do know what I want. I think that sounds like that's a real blessing. No.
I think so. Yeah. I think it is very important. Again, back to relationships. I think you need to have a very clear sense of yourself in order to negotiate, in order to have proper reciprocity. So I think this is helpful. So maybe the key is, not that I would ever think I knew the key, but the key is to know who you are, what you need, have some humility about your flaws, and then some practical curiosity and humility about the other person. So that's part of how I see that.
Yeah, and I think even when you say humility there, like just a capacity to be somewhat vulnerability is a phrase that's overused and I think misused a lot, but just to have the courage almost just to say what you want to another human being, or to to be curious, or to, as you say, to be curious or humble in terms of acknowledging your blind spots or acknowledging that they exist even if you don't know where they are,
Yeah.
and to bring that to relationships. I think there's so often where the things we feel like we're protecting ourselves from or hiding ourselves from displaying that to somebody else, they actually end up inhibiting us from ever actually really knowing who we are, because
Right. I
we've
think
never had to
that's
take
right.
that risk.
I think that's right. And I mean, this is also, I think you can have an impact, out there in the world also by asking the obvious question, by making the obvious point, by saying, actually, this seems odd to me. I don't understand this. There are so many people, I think, feeling like they have to act as if they know the answers, feeling like that's where they derive their authority, that's where they derive their paycheck. And so that means that if you can step back and ask the obvious, uncomfortable question, that's often extremely powerful.
Yeah, I love that as an idea. Like it's almost like there's so much focus on trying to ask something of like thinking outside the box, but so few people are just simply or critically thinking or honestly expressing what their curiosity is. That you can have so much impact with just trying to just ask the obvious, or ask what people are just assuming that everyone knows, but no one really knows.
Right. Well, exactly. And then I think, we have this frame of leadership. Just think about any CEO recently, and the vast majority of them kind of opining about, here's why we need to go back to the office. Here's why we're moving to a remote environment. We're in an unprecedented situation. How many CEOs did you ever hear saying, I don't know, what's best for my
Yeah.
organizational culture. We're going to try a few things and experiment and get the data and then make a decision. How much more powerful would that be to hear from a leader? The ability to say, I don't know, and I'm going to consult my workforce and ask questions for a year. We seem so convinced that to be a leader, you need to project authority, you need to project certainty. And I think very often that is ossifying us. It's preventing us from moving on. It's preventing us from having the conversations that we need. So this isn't a podcast about leadership, but I see so much of this sort of urge for having a different kind of leader, the kind of leader that will ask questions in a different way and have some sense of humility. And yet the people in charge at the moment seem to find that so incredibly difficult, and to feel such an urge to project certainty about questions about which, let's face it, none of us know the answer.
That resonates 1,000,000% with me. Do you think that that would be well received at this point in time? Like, I almost get the feeling that so much has shifted in terms of COVID was. I don't like COVID revealed what was already going on underneath the surface. I think people think that COVID created a lot of this stuff. I think so much was brewing in society, and that you only have to look at bloody chaos theory or something to realize that it's bloody hard to predict things. You know what I mean? And the certainty which we usually project onto things, and the control that we perceive that we had over situations, that it wasn't really sustainable to maintain that illusion that you could be a leader that truly knows what's coming all the time. Do you think that like market forces or investors like that, they'd be sympathetic to a leader that would approach life that way? Because I think experiment, you mentioned the word there, experimentation. I think both individually, so I always like to look at things on the micro and then trying to kind of see what that would look like on the macro. And our lack of experimentation in our lives, I think, is causing us misery, because we're kind of picking a point and saying in 5 years' time, I'm going to aim for that there. And it's not feasible to live like that, and to, with all the new information you're getting from your surroundings and your environment, it's just not a very, like, it's not going to bring you much, I don't know, contentment in your life, just rigidly sticking to a plan like this.
Right.
Like in terms of just the reaction to that, do you think people would be more sympathetic to a leader being a bit more honest about the need for experimentation?
I do. I mean, I think we've got to weigh this against the fact that if you're a leader, you need to set direction. You need to inspire people.
Yeah.
You need to everyone is making decisions all the time in an atmosphere of very high uncertainty. If you can't do that, if you're like, well, I don't know, let's consult the collective every single time, you will
Yeah,
piss
yeah.
people off more than if you don't set direction. So it is a case maybe of setting direction and adjusting. You certainly need to be able to display some momentum, to animate people, to motivate people, to give them a sense of where they're going. But I think where this becomes dangerous is if you become rigid, if you project certainty you don't feel, if you're not receptive to feedback, and if you won't shift course. So I'm certainly not saying it's easy. I think a good leader is able to chart a path between these two poles. But where we seem to be at the moment is valuing people that sound very confident about what they think and what they're doing. I think about someone like Elon Musk, for example, though the bloom is off him a little bit, but that sort of sense of very kind of egotistical certainty, we seem to value as a society far more than we should, at least in the West.
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Looking through your lots of the things that you've been saying here in terms of the need for adventure in your life, the enjoyment of novelty. I know I asked you like what helped you handle, or what developed or helped you cultivate more trust in the choices that you were making. But you mentioned now that you're kind of at a point when you're in the classroom and you actually like being somewhat grounded or rooted in a place for now. Is that because there's a mission that's kind of developing from where you are now? Do you feel like that there's something cultivating around you, or what's giving you that kind of sense of peace of remaining still for the foreseeable anyway?
Yeah, I think it's really just the case that I have, and it's not just teaching. I just wrote a book. I do a lot of very, very interesting work with a lot of amazing people and organizations. I feel that I'm finally playing to my strengths. I think I'm a sort of conscientious, guilty person. I think a lot of the time when I was young, I thought that I needed to do things that were hard. I needed to compensate for my weaknesses. I needed to study things I didn't find enjoyable because they'd be useful or they'd help me make more money. And I think I finally managed to find a role or a combination of roles that I think does play to my strengths and plays to the things I'm good at. And nothing gives me more pleasure than to feel that I've influenced someone in a positive direction. I'm enormously interested in working with young people, especially but not exclusively young women. I don't think I had very much mentorship or support when I was young. I find it very exciting to think that I could provide that for other people, to think that I could help them navigate some of the questions that I really struggled with when I was young. And so I think all of that is incredibly motivating and incredibly fulfilling. And I find it hard to imagine I would want to do anything different, but we'll see. I mean, I've gone through a lot of changes during my life, and I would not underestimate more that are coming.
That's such a beautiful answer. I interviewed this lady Biba, who was an executive for a number of years and sat on various boards and was a CEO of a large rail company. And she was mentioning, just as she moved through life, the comfort she suddenly had in starting to play to her strengths. Like,
Yeah.
and I think I'm seeing this as well in my own life. Coming to things like meditation or having gone through therapy or journaling or whatever, and you get so obsessed with, I'm not saying that there weren't things about me that needed to change. Jesus, that's that was painfully true as well. But there is something about suddenly coming to peace with who you are, and there's it's almost like giving yourself a permission, I think, to just say no, just go do what you're supposed to do now. Like not a giving up and trying to like smooth out your edges or something to this effect, but it seems like that's something I've seen with a number of people I've interviewed as well. Like just like I've ran around the world, or I've tried all these different spaces, and now I can kind of settle into what I feel really really capable in.
Yeah, exactly. I know a wonderful coach who I used to work with called Liz Best, and she has this expression, what if it's easy? Like, what would it look like if this was easy and you had permission to do the things that you were good at and you knew this would work out? And I just think it sounds so simple. There's so much insight in that question. And yeah, I would say that's the story of what I've been doing at least the last few years is it feels like, yeah, this is a groove I'm in. This is a place I could have an impact. This is where, I'm not going to change the world, but I might change my little corner of the world. So maybe less grandiose ambitions, but more fully realized, something like that.
Yeah, and just a sense then as well of you mentioned that it's it's so nice to be able to afford younger women that you're mentoring, for them to be able to ask the questions that you felt you couldn't when you were coming up in the world. Kind of what kind of questions did you feel inhibited to ask?
Oh, I just think the world is constantly, I think this is partly a gender issue, is constantly telling you to have self doubt if you're a woman, is constantly telling
Right.
you you don't have authority, is constantly telling you you don't have the right to speak, is constantly telling you you're either too young or too old, you're too punchy or you're too restrained, you're too timid or you're too loud. You're always too something. Um, and
Hmm.
so I think if I can have conversations with young women and say, you're not too anything, keep going, baby, you are going to win. Just don't let the bastards grind you down. Then that to me is a good impact. And I see these brilliant young people, not just women, and I want them to feel that they can unleash themselves. I want them to feel they can say what they think. I want them to feel that they can change the world. There's a wonderful newish book by a writer called Vanessa Bones called You Have More Influence Than You Think. And she did all these tests to show, in fact, we do have more influence on the world. We can feel like everything's impossible. We can feel like we can't create change. I'm trying to give people the sense that it took me far too long to get, that they can change things while they're young. You don't need to put up with stuff. You don't need to do stuff because it's hard. You can make risky decisions emotions, you can go with the flow, you can play to your strengths, and it will probably work out for you.
And I think you're firing a number of life lessons at a at a very quick velocity here. It's wonderful. What do you think do you think it is having the right mentors that allows people to do this at an earlier stage in life, like not to play this game? It's almost like having the right people in your life that just allow you to see the world in a different way. It's not this sense of, you have to go through decades of almost drudgery or paying your dues or earning a right, like these kind of things, like where it's just like, no, you can, I love the sense of like unleashing yourself, like being yourself. It
Yeah.
seems like there's so many beautiful messages there. Like, is what do you think it will allow, what do you think most allows these people or helps these people to kind of follow that sentiment?
I mean, I think I see people that are very clear about who they are and don't struggle with these things.
Mm.
I think this is partly a question of upbringing. It's partly a question of privilege. It's partly a question of personality. But what I would say is you don't have to be trapped by any of those things. You don't have to be trapped by your upbringing or your past. You can shed these kind of problematic assumptions. Yeah, I don't like the frame that everything is kind of set in our genes, is set in where we came from. I like the idea that you can be different people at different stages in your life, that you are not trapped by the past and that you can reshape the future. So I weigh this against, of course, there's chance, there's fate, we don't really have control. But you can move through life and influence it more than you think. And I think a little reflection, a little help, maybe a little therapy, a little variety, certainly mentorship, all of these things can be really helpful.
In terms, look, you've covered so many, I think, deeply important things here in terms of just as someone moves through life and in their own attempts to have a good life. You're talking at the very start, the sense of a curiosity of observing life, like what motivates people, having this deep curiosity, also an intuitive sense of like what are people feeling that they're not saying, like just this, that like almost then this like an investigative sort of sense that led you to investigating companies through the Middle East, really this kind of sense of what's going on beneath the surface, but then not having a plan in life, this once again this kind of not reacting to life, you're just saying there's some control in the process, there's some reflection, even some therapy maybe can help us, like whatever it is, but then ultimately kind of coming to some sort of peace where it's okay, yes, there's these number of adventures in my life, but coming back to almost this peace within yourself of then becoming more myself, allowing myself almost to deal in my strengths and not to be like focusing on where I feel I need to improve myself, where I need to like to step up in terms of addressing what someone could perceive as a weakness and detracting from a focus on my strengths. This gorgeous sentiment too of a reflective life as well, of contemplating on the paths that I haven't taken at times as well. But ultimately almost it feels like this beautiful kind of like merging into just like letting go of caring what other people think, or letting go of that sensitivity to what other people think, having a willingness to communicate in a very open and honest way and in a vulnerable or curious way, a humility of constructing and deconstructing my worldviews with travel and the likes of this. And then ultimately coming to this beautiful point, I think, of like, I know who I am and I know what I want. And then from this space as well, then kind of shifting into how do I contribute to other people's lives? How do I push this onwards with people that you're mentoring? Or, how do I contribute to, okay, maybe I'm not going to fix the whole world, but maybe there's a corner of the world that I can contribute to. Like I think even just with all that you've provided, that's that would be a considerable contribution to a good life. But as I tend to have the habit here of asking people towards the end of the discussion, what is a good life for you, Alison?
I think it's all the things you said, but I think the thing I'm still working on, the thing I'm still really struggling with, is the ability to be in the moment with its imperfections, to be fully present in what I'm doing. This has been something I have struggled with enormously. I'm an anxious, conscientious person. I think about the future. I try to shape the future. I worry about what might happen. I cogitate too much on the past. So the people that I've met that I think really have life right, are fully present in the moment with all its imperfections, living in that way. And this is a quality that can come with a lot of downsides as well. There is nothing perfect, but that is where I want to put my energy now. How can I be more fully present in what I'm doing, less focused on the future, less focused on the past, really kind of using all my senses, all my skills to observe and react to what's going on around me. I think that is the best way to shape the future. It's the best way to understand the past. And that's what I plan to spend the rest of my time on Earth trying to cultivate and trying to get right, along with all the other things that we've discussed.
And when did this kind of realization materialize for you?
Oh, I think this has come to the fore in the past decade as well. As I've learnt things. I've learnt to relax a little bit more. I've dealt with some of my historic baggage, and it's helping me see more clearly what the kind of underlying problems are for maybe all of humanity, or some of them. What are the things that all human beings struggle with, and what are the things I'm particularly bad at that I need to work on? And living in the present, being in the moment, that's not a strength. So it is something that I need to pay focused attention to, and I plan to keep doing that.
Yeah, it's I guess in some ways though too, like it's there's this, I don't know, this almost like spiritual perspective, I'd say, almost of like, can I view the universe as perfect, but not detach myself from the like the obvious human suffering that is taking place? Like, so it's
Yes.
this weird paradox of
Yes.
like, can I hold the world like in almost viewing it as this beautiful, perfectly balanced thing? Like, I think even in quantum physics, there's a theory at the moment that if you add up all the positive and negative energy on the planet, it comes to zero.
Yeah.
Something about that
Yeah.
that really
Yeah.
trips me out. I'm not making any academic conclusions from that, if you know what I mean. But just there is this weird kind of sense of, and I can imagine just with the kind of work that you're doing and the things that you're uncovering, that can be, especially when you see so much at times maybe corruption, or as you said like you've gone to the very dark edge or dark edge of human ethics as well in what you're uncovering. I guess it's not always the easiest fit either if it's not the focus. Like I could imagine how that could slip out of balance in terms of just what you're exposing to yourself in terms of just you see how the world is in certain areas.
Yeah, I think you see the world as it, you try to see the world as it is. You hold all the problems front and center. You don't deny them. You don't belittle them. But what would we do if we knew things would work out? How would we act differently? What decisions would we make? What would we say if we felt that we could be honest and say what we really think? I think, that's what I try to ask myself every day, and I'm gonna kind of keep asking that question till I die, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's so much of this that comes down to, can I be at peace with the, when we talk about like what businesses are doing, or can I come to peace with even with who I am? That's for me like, can I accept myself and the totality of myself as well, even let alone the universe, whether that's my thoughts, my judgments, all of these things as well.
Absolutely.
Um, and I think that's a lovely mission to have in your mind's eye at this point as well. Look, Alison, thank you so much for all that you've shared in this conversation, and thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it. I find the journey to be a very inspiring one.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to have a very fun and interesting and different conversation. Not the kind of questions I'm normally asked, and it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.